Okay, so this week saw the release of F1 25. We didn't actually receive review code on that, which is a bit surprising, but it does mean that we missed out on actually something really, really impressive that we did want to highlight, which is the fact that the game on PC for the first time now supports path-traced visuals. And actually, I was thinking back to when I went to see the developer look at the PS5 Pro version. They were quietly excited about something that they would not tell me what it was. And I got an email from them this week saying, actually, it was this. So, Alex, you've had the time, not a huge amount of time, but you have had the time to check out F1 path tracing. And I'm curious about your thoughts.
Well, let me just go over it in like a mini way, like I would with a normal PC game. One thing, I haven't looked at an F1 in a dedicated video, I believe, ever on the channel. It's typically been Tom's remit. Yeah. And he's done a really good job with that. But I just want to say a couple things about the PC version that I think in general, even beyond path tracing, that are pretty well done. You do have a pretty slick menu system. I've sent some footage over here. You go into the options, and there are a ton of graphical options. That is very useful, and the game is extremely scalable. The only probably negative thing is that the video mode menu is a sub menu to the graphics menu. So I think a lot of people could be a little confused about how they change resolution, which also contains the options for DLSS, DRS, and the like, as well as ray reconstruction, I believe, is also in that menu, which is a part of this update as well. It is F1 2025 supports path tracing as a single click option in the menu. Arguably, it'd be nice if we had some more control over that, of course, for performance and quality reasons, as well as future scaling and ray reconstruction with a different set of denoisers, I believe, being used for that. But I did not look at them. Rather, I just loaded up the game with ray reconstruction on, without any of the ray tracing, with ray tracing and with path tracing. And I just wanted to see in general how it runs. And I made this video here that I sent to Oliver. I'm doing, as Rich always lovingly says, Bahrain in the rain. And you can see that the game's initial ray tracing implementation is actually really light. We've seen a number of the feature set running well on RDNA 2, RDNA 3 on PC. It's actually one of the few games where we see pretty similar performance between NVIDIA, Intel, and RDNA 2 or RDNA 3 offerings. It's been pretty AMD friendly, and they've done that in a lot of ways. Versus the 4K Max DLAA experience, it's not too much heavier to be running the ray tracing suite in this game, which includes a form of ray traced GI, a form of ray traced reflections, RTAO, as well as ray traced shadows. Then you turn on path tracing, and this is 4K DLAA here, and Bahrain here in the rain, which is one of the most expensive ways to run the game because you get full screen reflections commonly all over the place, as well as this really cool volumetric fogging effect that appears behind each of the F1 cars. It's actually really cool. I haven't seen that in many games. It's really expensive. And that there, depending upon the scene, I'm only showing it here. It technically can be heavier in replays, but it can be anywhere from below 30 to above 30 FPS, even like 40 FPS
on
range.
What hardware?
This is an RTX 5090.
Okay.
Sorry, I did all my testing. I did, yeah. It's super expensive.
Good Lord.
Well, path tracing you'd expect to be using upscaling.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the thing is, to get a fully locked 60F experience, regardless of where you were, you could, that I'm saying like locked 60, no drops in gameplay, you would have to go down to actually to DLSS balance mode to make sure that it is achieved in all scenarios for gameplay. I will not guarantee replays. Replays in this game are a lot heavier, even though they don't look that much different than gameplay. I'm not sure exactly what's causing that. But DLSS balance mode, for example, for a locked 60, it's actually going to be unlocked around like 80 FPS for the most part on a 5090. And obviously, if you're using the frame generation features that the game has, you'll be getting a much better experience, at least in terms of smoothness and image persistence. So it is pretty darn heavy. But when you get into the game, it's pretty cool. I've also created this side-by-side as well as back and forths for Oliver here. What does path tracing bring to the table? And it's actually quite a lot. One of the biggest things you'll see is like I'm in this underpass area right here. A lot of the tracks have like you go underneath a bridge and whatnot. And this is typically the area in a game where you're going to see the biggest lighting differences, because to just have an open field look good with rasterized lighting isn't actually that hard. That's why games like Death Stranding, for example, can look really good, because most of the game takes place in an, just like a large open sky, and you really only need SSAO to cover areas of occlusion or shadow maps. But when you get into areas where lighting is occluded, or there's changes of lighting, that's when ray tracing or path tracing really come into their own. And in this case here, some of the big areas you'll notice the differences is like there's this bridge overhead with like these hanging down metal bits like rafters, and the shading is completely different between rasterization, ray tracing, and path tracing. And with path tracing, you see like a greater variation in tone than in all of them, as well as color, because the light is bouncing from the sun, the light is bouncing from the sky, and the shadows are naturally interweaving in that from the areas where that light is occluded. With rasterization, this area looks kind of almost full bright and a little bit awkward, and that's because the game uses just SSAO with probe lighting. With ray tracing, it looks a little better, but the issues with the game's RTGI model kind of come in. It only uses a version of RTGI called DDGI, which is originally invented by NVIDIA, I think in like 2019, and it's probe-based RT lighting. So It only has like probe density issues where lighting can leak through, and also it's not going to be locally representative of smaller things like the car and whatnot. That won't be included. Only like the static geometry and in like a very coarse manner. And the way they prevent light leaking with that is this game adds an RTAO on top of it, which actually leads to an over darkening in aspects like this. This place underneath the bridge here is overly dark. You look at the car in the front here in this underpass area that I just was talking about, you'll see a really big difference in the shading on the car itself. The version with rasterization, it kind of looks overly matte and it's overly bright. You go to ray tracing, it becomes more nuanced, but at the same time, you'll see a lot of stuff is kind of, once again, overly dark due to RTAO there, and it lacks directionality. There's just like dark pockets, essentially where you would find SSAO usually. It's actually not very accurate. But you go over to path tracing and all of the different levels of roughness are actually covered for bouncing light. And that makes a really big difference on the inside of this car, or even just on the surface of it, because not everything is just like a perfectly mirror sheen. And that is something that the path tracing covers much better than the ray tracing implementation, which actually keeps most of the reflections in the game to like a mirror-like sheen, and then still uses things like real-time Q maps extensively. And it looks a lot better, like the characters, like helmet, the entire dashboard area. It looks actually incredibly good. I want to talk about one last thing before we can start talking about it in general, but I also made another comparison at the start of a race, right before it starts, and like the inside of the car, you'll see once again that it's like a white car, and the entire cockpit area is also white, minus the steering wheel. And the rasterization and the RT cannot actually cover this scenario because they don't get any sort of bounce lighting from dynamic objects. And in the path trace version of it, if you look over at the large splitting bar in the middle, like usually where you'd see a windshield on a normal car, that is actually lit up completely differently here. And it gets like all this cool bounce lighting from the inside of the cockpit going up. And you actually see some like other small bounce lighting here too, like the blue of the character's hand is lightening up the inside of the cockpit nearby. There's a ton of nuance here. And this is just two little examples. If you go through other areas in the game, you'll see that every single light now is shadow casting. That's really big for all the large artificial lights and small artificial lights. When you go through tunnels, you get that like cool, like rapidly like oscillating shadow effect when you go through a tunnel with all the lights, because you're going like, I don't know, how fast do these F1 cars go? They go ridiculously fast. Either way, it's like super fast, and it holds up actually really well. The denoising, bar a few things, is really well done, even in spite of the speed in this game. I would say the only area where, if you look at the B-roll that I'm sending right now to Oliver, if you're looking at the back wheels of the car, typically, that is where the denoising I'm not sure if it's 100% denoising or if they add an effect. I turned off motion blur here, but they will become kind of more smooth surface looking as they spin faster. You'd imagine with like a high shutter speed, for example, that you wouldn't be getting that. But all in all, it holds up really well. The only areas where I noticed some issues so far were people in the stands, the onlookers, the gawkers, I don't know how you call them.
Gawkers.
The fans.
The gawkers.
The voyeurs.
The voyeurs. Right. The people in the stands, they don't appear to be included in the RTBVH. They aren't included also in the game's normal shadow maps, but they do stick out. So a lot of the bystanders in the game just standing around do have worse lighting on them and cast worse lighting, I've noticed. As well as there's one sequence here where I'm like in a almost clean room garage before a race starts, and all the characters around me look a little like Fulbright and weird. I think it's because they're somehow the lighting in this area is not configured well, either from a post-processing perspective or maybe there's just an asset problem. But they looked a little bit over bright. But in general, it is a huge upgrade to the game's visual realism. Heavy, but expected. And I'm in love with how F1 year on year has been constantly adding in new RT features to their engine. It originally started with just like, I believe it was just shadows almost. And then it went to reflections, DDGI plus RTAO. And then now path tracing. And if it keeps iterating like this, it's going to be incredible. Because I can already imagine other areas where this can be used, where it's currently not used. Like it's not being used for refractions. It's not being used for like transparency lighting. There's like so many areas where this can go even in the future and have it look better and better each time. So bravo to the
Absolutely,
team.
yeah. I mean, F1 24, I mean, they did a lot of ray tracing work on that, and they could actually backport that to PS5 Pro when the Pro eventually appeared. So, they're building up this impressive bank of technology there, and the consoles will eventually catch up to use it, which I think is quite impressive. But in the here and now, the PC is getting all of these fantastic features. We've actually got this question from Ham Sanderviston. Hello, Fame Counters. Alex reskeeted a CompuSemble post showing off F1 2025, which included both path-traced and raster scenes. Some all-raster shots look surprisingly flat and unlit. And he's pointed out a particular shot there. It made me wonder, are devs starting to skip the time-intensive process of fine-tuning raster scenes? I'm all for progress, as seen in Doom: The Dark Ages, but at this point, comparing raster to ray tracing might be increasingly meaningless, especially if less effort is going into raster fidelity. I'm not sure that's the case as such. It's just a natural benefit.
That is not the case.
It's just the natural benefits that you get from ray tracing and path tracing, right?
Right. So this game has like, I don't know how many tracks. I want to say it's like 25 tracks, and they can all have a variety of daytime scenarios, as well as rain or not rain. And you're going to find areas where there is a non-shadow casting raster light for performance reasons, or due to the fact that not every artist can go to every area. You're going to find areas where a lighting probe is, sneaking through some terrain or going through a building wall. And you have to rely in that point on either artist going in there and making sure that probe is deleted, or you have to rely on SSAO. And you'll see scenes of flat lighting. This game uses a variety of SSAO techniques. You can choose between them. There's like that AMD's GTAO or Intel's GTAO, etc. I believe there's HBAO as well as a normal SSAO. And you're just looking at the fact that SSAO cannot be tuned for every single scene, as well as it cannot cover an entire breadth of scenarios. And even then, it's only in screen space. So if you look at an object head on, unless you crank up the radius, you're going to get something that looks like it's floating. And if you crank up the radius, every car looks like it's hazed. You got like a halo haze around it, like we saw back in Far Cry 3, right? So these are massive hacks just to make anything run that requires an artist to look at them. And the benefits of ray tracing and path tracing are that if you have a huge game of this size, that you'll get better looking lighting scenarios per default because it's systemically lit. So this to me is not, oh, how could they not just turn on SSAO for this scene? They did have SSAO on. There's so many different types of scenes in a game that not all of them can ever look good. And that's kind of what we're seeing.
Mm-hmm.
Fair enough. Okay, F125 out now. We're going to be taking a look at it when we've got some time, hopefully. The timing has been particularly bad, and we're going to be missing a
Not
lot
good.
of stuff going into June, unfortunately, simply because of the Switch 2 launch and all of these events that are happening simultaneously. But hopefully we'll get around to it because, these guys really know what they're doing. There's some fantastic stuff happening there at Codemasters. Okay, that was a lot to get through. John, thoughts?
Yeah, so one of the things I wanted to ask you, Alex, actually, because I feel like we've not seen it yet, is I really want to see a game with a path tracer take advantage of lens simulation. So like simulating
Right.
shutter speed and the way light works. Like we love per pixel motion blur as is, but it is fundamentally not realistic, right? Like it tries to simulate realism, but there's so many flaws with it. And I feel like path tracing very specifically could be used to do extremely accurate motion blur in a way that would really help these scenes look more realistic. Because
Right.
even to my eye now, this looks amazing, but it doesn't look real. And I feel like specifically it's some of those things missing still that prevent it from really striking the eye as being completely accurate, right? So
Yeah.
actually, can you think of any game that's done proper path tracer ray tracing to simulate the dynamics of a real camera yet?
So we have examples, at least with Quake 2 RTX, for example, technically is doing this, but it doesn't offer many lens options. The only lens options it offers are in its smaller photo mode. And it's an accumulating effect. So you have to sit still to let the depth of
Right.
field to accumulate. And I think I would love this too, because it all just plays into the fact that the current path tracing games, they do all their first degree lighting and second degree lighting by tracing a path, but they don't do the first path necessarily by path tracing.
Right.
And that's just primary visibility. And that is where you can start getting camera effects. And it's not more expensive to trace. It's not that much more expensive. And you do get some advantages. Technically, you can call the scene a lot better if you were to use it with path tracing. But accumulating motion blur and depth of field is a really hard thing to do at the moment. But there is some really cool active research into it where basically you have to have, like, if you think about it, like you have to have subframes that are somehow being rendered because you're seeing time. You'd have to be sampling time that isn't actually represented by a discrete frame. We fake it in rasterization by like blurring along the lines between two frames. But in path tracing, you'd actually have to say like, oh, we need to shoot a sample into a previous scene that we actually haven't even rendered. And that means you have a lot more noise,
Yeah.
and you have to need a way to clean it up. And there's a cool research paper by NVIDIA about using Raster to do depth of field and also motion blur. So it's using those principles, and it made incredible strides when I saw it. I think it was like 1.5 years ago versus just some sort of raw way of doing it. And I think it's actually should be coming. There's, curiously enough, hardware support in NVIDIA GPUs since Ampere for an acceleration of path traced motion blur, but nothing's used it other than Blender, to my knowledge. So, but I think it is something that we'll be seeing in the next like three years probably as like one of the first demos for it.
I actually think it might solve complaints people have with motion blur in general, because then it would just function more as the eye and the camera functions, right? So eliminate a lot of the unwanted side effects that motion blur still brings to the table. So I'm waiting for that patiently. And I guess the other thing I always look at when I look at a game like this is like when you actually break down what the path tracing brings to the table, it's excellent. But I still think that the game itself specifically falls short in the sense that I don't think their materials work, for instance, is quite up to par for producing photorealism. And even with path tracing, it's not like a magic bullet, right? There's still elements of the graphics pipeline that the artists and everything need to get exactly right to sort of capture that photorealism. And F1 is not there yet. Like I would argue, I still think Gran Turismo 7 does a better job with its materials in a way that makes me want to see that game with path trace lighting. I feel like that could actually do a lot better job, like replicating what you might expect to see realistically. Because F1, like there's something about the tarmac, the grass, the colors, it just doesn't look that real, right?
I mean, a lot of that goes into post-processing too. One of the things that the PD games tend to do really well is like post-processing. And that's probably an area where this game is a lot more rudimentary. I would also argue, like, in terms of materials, like, it's not just like that in the material is like matte or glossy. There's a lot of other things that materials do.
Oh, sure. Exactly.
And I'd probably say that's where, like, the one thing is I recently watched an F1 thing because I was visiting family and they were watching it. And I was like, these cars, they don't look like normal cars at all. They have a lot of weird materials on them.
The cars themselves, I think, look good. It's more like the dirt, the tarmac, the trees. Those things still, like, there's something about the way they're presented in this game. It doesn't strike me as that real still. Even with this incredible path trace lighting.
Yeah, I mean, I'd agree with that, especially with the grass. The grass in the game's super simplistic, actually, in comparison to the cars. But, obviously, there's only so much. Yeah,
they also have limits on budget and time, and these games ship fairly regularly, right? So I get it.
Yeah, every year. Yeah,
it's still cool to see them doing this, though, and I appreciate the breakdown.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, of course. And I just only wish we got it beforehand because I worked on a video that should be coming out right now. And I might have not chosen to make that video had I had this, and I could have been pimping their game for them.
Mm-hmm. Oh, geez.
Okay, fair enough. I mean, maximum respect to the Codemasters team because they are just, continuing to iterate with these excellent PC features. That's kind of what we want from a PC game.